Simone Biles, Usain Bolt, Allison Felix, Michael Phelps, Katie Ledecky, shining among the much-deserved glory of these star Olympians who rack up medals and break records and inspire us with their superhuman strength and speed, are the stories of Olympians who have stolen the spotlight in Rio because of their superhuman heart and soul. By now, I'm sure most of you have seen the footage of the women's 5,000-meter semifinal, when, with 2,000 meters to go, U.S. runner Abby D'Agostino accidentally clipped New Zealand runner Nikki Hamblin from behind, and they both took a horrible fall down. D'Agostino was the first to get up, and after a quick glance at the pack of runners moving ahead, she looked down and saw that Hamblin was still on the ground. And instead of running ahead, she bent down, put her hand on Hamblin's shoulder and said, "Get up, we have to finish this." Hamblin, snapped out of her momentary stupor, said, "Yeah, you're right. This is the Olympic Games. We have to finish this." D'Agostino had hurt her ankle and knee worse than she realized, and she was grimacing as she ran. Hamblin was hanging back with her to support her and help her, and finally D'Agostino said, "Just go ahead, I'm hurt, go ahead and run," and so she did. And when Hamblin crossed the finish line, she turned around and saw that D'Agostino was still running. And when she crossed the finish line, they both embraced. And their tears were not the only tears in the arena. These two women had never met. Hamblin said that she will never forget that moment. When someone asks me what happened in Rio in 20 years' time, that's my story. That girl shaking my shoulder saying, "Come on, get up." It was a "you've got this" kind of a moment. A moment when you are full of self-doubt and someone else believes in you and gives you the courage to keep going. Most times these "you've got this" moments don't come from strangers. They come from friends or family members. And sometimes these moments come from within ourselves. This was the case for the U.S. gymnast Lori Hernandez, who's quickly become known for her huge smiling eyes and expressive face as she performs, but also for this moment that was kind of off camera, or so she thought, that was captured by one filmer during the team all-around competition. Hernandez was about to compete on the balance beam, and seconds before she hopped up to begin, this 16-year-old whispered to herself, "I got this." And she hopped up on the beam. And as the world watched, we all said, "Yeah, you've got this." Of course, the team went on to win gold. There's something about competition that brings out the "you've got this" or the "I've got this" spirit. It's probably got something to do with all of the years of preparation and sweat and hard work and sacrifice for just a few minutes, or in some cases, a few seconds of competition. But the powerful affirmation, "you've got this," is not exclusively reserved for moments of competition. It's something we need to hear in all parts of our life, including our life of faith. It's so easy to doubt ourselves, especially when we're explaining our faith to a critic or a cynic, or when it comes to standing up for justice in a world where success often depends upon perpetuating injustice, or when we feel like we're doing our best to do everything right and it feels like everything is still going wrong, or when we just don't understand what's happening in our lives or in the world, or when we ourselves are being criticized or ostracized. These are the moments when we can doubt our faith, doubt our gifts from God, or even doubt our purpose for being here at all. When we feel this way, when we're doubting ourselves to our core, it can be hard to find any consolation from even the most well-meaning platitudes from friends and family members. Because we think that they don't understand, that if they really knew us and what was going on inside of us, that they wouldn't believe in us either, and that their confident "you've got this" would really become instead a very timid "you know what, honey, why don't you let someone else get this?" The young Jeremiah is having such a moment of self-doubt when he is called by God to be a prophet to the nations. Now, we need to understand the whole of Jeremiah's long life to even begin to grasp the significance of this early moment of call and commissioning, as Jeremiah remembers it here and describes it. Jeremiah does not suppress or sugarcoat his struggles. He lived during a pivotal time of national transition, and he preached through the reigns of 5 kings, from reform under King Josiah all the way through to the exile under King Zedekiah. His ministry pronounced the death of one world and announced the birth of another, as he was engaging the dangerous work of dismantling the people's civic, cultural, and religious life. Jeremiah was called to confront a corrupt political system and an immoral society that really did not want to hear what he had to say. No one ever wants to hear what a prophet has to say. Jeremiah would pay dearly for his willingness to speak the truth. For bringing God's word to God's people, he would be beaten, thrown in a well, imprisoned, and hounded. And beside the physical suffering that he endured, he would agonize over a nation that wouldn't respond spiritually to God. He begs for his eyes to become fountains so he can weep and weep for his people, whose choices are taking them further and further away from God. Eugene Peterson, the author of The Message, sums up Jeremiah's life well. His life spanned one of the most troublesome periods in Hebrew history. The decades leading up to the fall of Jerusalem in 587 BC, followed then by the Babylonian exile. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. And Jeremiah was in the middle of it all, sticking it out, praying and preaching, suffering and striving, writing and believing. He lived through crushing storms of hostility and furies of bitter doubt. Every muscle in his body was stretched to the limit by fatigue. I think some of our pew reupholsterers might say that this week. Every feeling in Jeremiah's heart was put through the fires of ridicule, and every thought in his mind was subjected to questioning. He concludes by saying, in looking for a companion who's lived through catastrophic disruption in his life and survived it with a little bit of grace, people will come upon Jeremiah and receive him as a true and honest and God-revealing companion for the worst of times. When people say the Bible isn't relevant for our times because our times are so complex and there's so much suffering, we can point people to the book of Jeremiah and say, are you sure about that? There's plenty of relevance here for us. So with all of this in mind, we turn back to Jeremiah's call and commissioning by God. It begins with God reminding Jeremiah that God has known him from the beginning and knows far more about him, inside and out, than Jeremiah even knows about himself. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. And before you were born, I consecrated you. I appointed you, as a prophet to the nations. Now, you could read this as a statement of predestination by God, or you could read it as a realization by an older Jeremiah that this call that was on his life was forming inside of him before he even knew it was there. That, it wasn't a decision that he just made one day to up and become a prophet. My non-churchy friends sometimes make fun of call language because those of us in the church can use it and make ourselves sound important, like, God called me to the ministry. And they're thinking, does that mean that I was called by God to work at the Genius Bar at the Apple Store? Well, maybe. Or maybe it just means you're called by God to do something where you use your amazing listening skills and your endless patience to use non-technological terms and explain techie stuff to non-techie people who are angry that their computer's not working. You could use those listening skills and the gift of endless patience and clear explanation, in any field. But to not be working with people in that way, as a guide or a teacher in that capacity, that is what just wouldn't feel right in your life. That's that element of call. Beginning to understand your call can be as simple as knowing that you're not meant to work in a cubicle by yourself. You're meant to work in a collaborative, creative environment, or vice versa. So yeah, Jeremiah had a strong sense of call, probably stronger than most of us, but we can still relate to him. Because typical of call stories in the Old Testament, Jeremiah pushes back against this call from God, saying, "But God, I do not know how to speak, for I'm only a boy." Now this is like saying, "God, I can't be a lifeguard because I don't know how to swim." In the biblical world, speaking was essential to being a prophet. But God sees through the defenses that we put up, which almost always stem from self-doubt. God says to Jeremiah, "Don't say I'm only a boy, for you're going to go to the people I tell you to go to, and you're going to speak what I tell you to say to them." The point being that God can use anyone at any age with any skill level. And anytime we doubt that, it's because we're hearing the voice of society or culture or self-doubt and not the voice and inspiration of God. The Apostle Paul says God can do more than we could ever ask or imagine through us. Now, it's important to notice that God doesn't say that Jeremiah will do it all well or with perfection. God just says, "Look, you are old enough to start doing this, and don't worry about where to go or what to say. We'll get to that in time. You're jumping ahead. I'm going to help you figure that out. But first, I just need you to admit the fact that you kind of do feel like maybe you have it in you to be a prophet, but you just don't want to admit it because it scares you. And you know it's going to be hard. But just because you're scared to try something and you wonder if you can do it, that's not an excuse in my book, because I know you can do it. I'm God, and I created you. Like Jeremiah, whenever I suspect that I have enough ability to do something, but I just don't want to do it because of time or interest, or maybe a lack of confidence in my gifts, or because I think there are definitely others who could do it better than I, then I start making excuses. And this doesn't have to be about a major life decision. It could just be about trying a new way of serving at Calvary. Well, I could volunteer for Promise, but what if I don't know what to say to the families? God's reply, just help. The conversation will come, or it won't. But that's not the point. Just your presence is what is most important. You being there might be the first time that anyone has been there for those families. Or it could be a new way of dealing with conflict in a relationship with a coworker or friend. You think to yourself, well, I could pick up the phone and say, I think we had a misunderstanding and I was hurt when you said this. Instead of just shoving it down as resentment builds. But what if they don't understand or get upset with me? Perhaps God's reply would be, they're probably feeling the same way you feel, uneasy, and would really appreciate you reaching out. They might get angry, but if they get angry, chances are they were already angry, and now you've at least acknowledged it and can at least begin to talk about it. You both might have a miss or two in moving from misunderstanding to understanding. But is that really that bad? Because you'll miss out on the relationship altogether if you just ignore it. Now, I realize it's bold of me to play God. But I often do this, okay? I read the biblical text and I imagine God's responses to things. Because in the Bible, God has these succinct one-liners, like, don't say I'm a boy because you'll go where I send you and say what I tell you. Well, I have to believe that there's more of a monologue going on in God's head. It's just that God has a really good filter because, well, God is God. If I'm completely wrong about this, so be it. I wouldn't be the first to anthropomorphize God. But for me at least, sometimes thinking of God talking to you like your friend is the only way to learn to talk to God at all, or to hear God's voice speaking to you. Jeremiah, as he reflects on his call experience, remembers that he blurted out the first excuses that came to mind out of fear. Legitimate fear for the dangers of the outside world, and imagined fear for the sense of inadequacy he felt on the inside. This is normal. It's what we all do when we sense God might be wanting us to try something new in our lives. Whether it's a new job, or a new class or activity in school, or even a new approach to a relationship with a family member. Or maybe it's a call not to try something new, but to stay put, to live into where you are now because it's where you're supposed to be right now. Staying put can be answering a call too. Well, God responds to Jeremiah's fear with words that may not alleviate his fears immediately, but they're words, as you read the book of Jeremiah, that he will return to again and again. They're words of assurance and comfort. God says, "Do not be afraid of them, for I am with you to deliver you." I don't guess that it's comforting for Jeremiah to think about the fact that if God will deliver him, it means that he'll be in a predicament from which he needs to be delivered. And as the final verbs in this passage reveal, 4 of which are destructive: pluck up, pull down, destroy, and overthrow, Jeremiah's time as a prophet will be more of walking in the valley of the shadow of death than it will be being led beside still waters. But it is not only God's delivering or doing that is supposed to be the comforting part, I think. It's God's being. It's those 4 simple words, "I am with you." Jeremiah's first "you got this" moment, and there will be many more after. It doesn't come from another person. It doesn't come from within himself. It comes from God. Not when God tells Jeremiah that he'll tell him all he needs to know, but it's when God says, "I am with you." Circling back to the Olympics, in interviews with Hamlin and D'Agostino after their race, Hamlin said, "She chose to get me up and bring me back into the moment." But D'Agostino replies, "I didn't really choose to do it. everything happened so fast, and all I know is that I got up and my first instinct was, okay, turn around, talk to her. We've got to finish this together. I don't think it was me, she said. I think it was literally the Spirit of God in me saying, let's do this. What D'Agostino teaches us is that no matter who delivers the "you've got this" message at key moments in our lives, they are really all from God. For God speaks to us through other people and through our own strength and intuition, and yes, even directly sometimes, as with Jeremiah. The timeless truth and power of this text today, especially knowing all that will come after in Jeremiah's life, that all of his hardships will validate his fears and even his sense of inadequacy, is the truth that our God is a "you've got this" God. God is not a "you can't do this" God, or a "you're not good enough" God, or "why don't you wait until you feel ready to try something before you try something" God. God is a "you've got this" God. Now, today, just as you are, you've got this. Go make a difference, take a chance, change the world. And if you feel like you're not changing the world, well, you are, because just by taking a chance, you're changing yourself. The God who created us, each uniquely, is the same God who calls us to do things that we think are beyond our own strengths and gifts. But it's really not about our strength, is it? It's about God's. The true reason that our God is a "you've got this" God is because before God ever says to us, "you've got this," God says, "I've got you." No matter what decision you're facing today, or what's going on in your heart or in your life, or what changes are before you, hear God say to you that you've got this. Not because you have amazing superhuman strength or talent or wisdom, although you probably have those things too, but hear God say, "You've got this, because I've got you." Amen.